What we're seeing right now is an incredibly dangerous level of nuclear threat that Putin has raised from the beginning of the invasion, putting his nuclear forces on high alert and making explicit nuclear threats. And what that means is Putin is trying to use his nuclear arsenal as a shield to prevent anyone else from interfering in the war crimes that he is committing in Ukraine. And this is a really, I think, dangerous and dark side to the nuclear arsenals and this policy of nuclear deterrence that Russia and most countries in the world adhere to that have nuclear weapons. And this is why it's so important that we do eliminate nuclear weapons so that countries like Russia and Putin can't use their nuclear forces to prevent other countries from stopping them from committing war crimes. As long as nuclear weapons exist, and there are thousands of nuclear weapons around the world today, there is a threat of their use, a real threat that we can experience the humanitarian catastrophe that we witnessed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki decades ago. But this time, there are thousands and thousands of weapons in the world that can be used, many of which are hundreds of times more powerful than the ones dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The only way to eliminate this risk is to eliminate nuclear weapons. The threat of nuclear weapons is outlawed by international law. It's prohibited by the UN Charter and more recently by the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It's really important that all countries condemn these nuclear threats by Russia. I think what's really scary about the fact that these weapons are controlled by just a handful of countries and just a handful of world leaders, what this means is that they can be used. In many countries, it's just one man's decision, one president's decision to press the red button to launch nuclear weapons. And there can never be enough safeguards to ensure that weapons aren't used accidentally or in a rash decision. That's why we really need to eliminate these weapons, because there is a threat of their use and we cannot afford any use of nuclear weapons. Well, we've seen a lot of talk about Putin deciding to use a so-called low-yield nuclear weapon. Now, these weapons, sometimes a low-yield nuclear weapon is considered a 100-kiloton weapon. That's a weapon that is as destructive as 100 kilotons of dynamite. And this weapon is many times more powerful than the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons, equivalent of 15 kilotons of dynamite. And this is one of the small nuclear weapons that is being discussed could be used in Europe. And we know that any nuclear weapon, even a 100-kiloton nuclear weapon, would have catastrophic humanitarian consequences, resulting in long-term diseases, long-term radiation and contamination of the environment. It's really not a scenario that we can even envision having to survive. I think we do really need to rely on international law. And we've seen that that's what countries have been doing around the world at the UN, condemning Putin's use of weapons banned under international law, like the Cluster Munitions Convention, condemning Putin's violation of the UN Charter. And I think we have to remember that these conventions and treaties do have weight, and Putin's actions are incredibly unacceptable. And we need to continue to condemn them and ensure that he feels the pressure to no longer continue committing war crimes.